Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. My pleasure.
I'm going to ask you a series of questions today. Some of them are going to be very straightforward. Some will be a little more philosophical.
Absolutely.
Let's start with the straightforward. Would you mind telling us your name, please?
My name is Kenneth Rouche, or Kenneth Maurice Rouche.
And Mr. Rouche, if I may, could you, for the record, what pronouns do you prefer?
I prefer Mr.
Thank
He.
you. And if you would, a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? How were you educated? Your family? Anything you'd like to tell us that would help us understand more about who you are as a person?
Absolutely. So, my family, my mother's family, is in Douglas, Georgia, Coffee County. So, that's where I was born. At a young age, we moved to Savannah. And so, I know Savannah is home for the most part, but I still have many relatives in Douglas, Georgia. So, I spent my life between Douglas and Savannah. Wound up living here, though.
Mm-hmm.
Give me just one sec, Tom. I'm sorry. I want to fix this mic. It's casting a little bit of a shadow. And that's because it's too low.
I've learned a lot.
Okay. All right. I'm getting out of the way. Thank you.
Here's what I really learned. You have to pack all this stuff in and pack it out.
Oh, yeah.
It's like 2,500 pounds of stuff. You know, who knew? As a young person, part of your life was in Douglas, Georgia, part in Savannah.
Yes.
And so you've sort of lived in the rural world and in the urban world.
Yes.
And then in Savannah, where did you go to school and kind of what neighborhood you grow up in and just sort of how'd you sort of fit into the town as you were growing up?
So we wound up I lived in Caton Homes on the west side of Savannah for many years. So I wound up going to Gadsden Elementary School, and I was there until the fourth grade, and I went to Juliet Low for fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. And then I was at Myers Middle School, Mercer Middle School for a year, Myers, went to Johnston for a year, and then we moved, and I went to Savannah High, and I graduated from Savannah High.
I got you. And then after Savannah High, what happened next for you?
I went to Savannah State University, and I was actually a mass communications major, and I majored in communications and I minored in music, and so that's what I did. It took the long route through Savannah State. I went to school for a while, I worked for a while, and then I eventually finished. I met my wife, and she said, get a degree and then we can get married. And so,
Focus.
yes,
Focus.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. What's your instrument?
I play bass violin.
How did that happen?
That's a funny story. So I started playing bass violin. It was almost an accidental. So the music teacher, Mr. Walter Rumpel, came into our classroom, and he told my teacher that he'd like to speak with the tallest young men in the class because they were starting the orchestra at the school. So my friend and I walked outside. He explained the orchestra and the bass violin, and Jeff wasn't interested. And I said, I'd like to try it. And so I went in, and from that day, I stayed from playing there at Juliet Low to the Savannah Youth Orchestra. And so that was how I got started, just by being a little taller than everybody else and saying yes to the opportunity.
Well, there's the teaching point right there. Saying yes to the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, also, let me just, for our purposes here, could you talk a little bit about, and this is again just kind of factual, then we'll get into a bigger conversation. Would you talk a little bit about being the police chaplain and just again kind of how it works almost, kind of the
Sure.
structure of it and what your responsibilities are?
Absolutely. So I've been a police chaplain for around 7 years, and the police chaplains are a part of an overall support system for our officers, with being a police officer being such a high stress level job and a position. So we're there to provide that support, a more so casual type of support, even for the officer's mental health, or if there are stressful situations and if an officer doesn't choose to formally go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist to talk, then we are around the precincts and we establish these relationships in the event, in the hopes that they will feel confident and comfortable to speak with us concerning personal matters that we keep here to our heart. And so that is the main thing. A lot of people think that as chaplains, we're only here for trouble in the streets, but we're also there, first of all, for the officers to provide a safe space for them to share their concerns or what's on their heart, to ease the stress of the situations for the officers.
And then how did you, again, I'm just kind of trying to understand your journey a little bit. College, and then did you get interested in police work first? Did you get interested in chaplaincy first? Or was there a more circuitous journey before any of that began to happen? I mean, how did all that begin to unfold in your life?
So chaplaincy came on a little later. When I left Savannah State, I actually moved to Atlanta, and I went to University of West Georgia, and I was certified in middle grades to teach. So I began to teach in Atlanta. I came back here and taught in Chatham County for some years. And in that time, I became familiar with not only police chaplaincy, but hospital chaplaincy as well. And so I found out about a program at Memorial Hospital for clinical pastoral education. And so while I was going around the hospital, we had so many classroom hours and we had so many hours on the floor with patients. And around that time, I also found out that there was a program for police chaplains as well, because a lot of times, a lot of situations, police chaplains wound up at the hospital and vice versa. We wound up in the streets. So anyway, I actually applied to become a police chaplain at that time, and I was actually accepted into the chaplain's corps around the same time I was a hospital chaplain through the CPE program at Memorial. CPE, which is clinical pastoral education.
Could you just describe like what a quote typical day and what a quote typical week looks like for you in this role?
Absolutely. So I made my weekly visit to the precinct this week, and so there's a 6 a.m. roll call, and so I was there. There are a lot of new hires in the police department right now, so this past week, just a few days ago, I went in and introduced myself to the new officers. There's actually a new captain in that precinct, so I normally go in to introduce myself and to let them know that I've been assigned to that precinct, and to let them know that I'm there for conversations, for counseling. In some precincts, they actually give us an office that we can go into. If an officer ever needs to chat at certain times, we can coordinate a time to sit there and conversate with them. A lot of times we go in there we may speak for a minute or so to encourage the officers. We don't go in as a chaplain is not a preacher. We don't go in there pushing our faith. We're there for all faiths and all people, but maybe a word of encouragement will go in there to give to the officers. On that same day, when I went the other day, I found out that in one of the neighborhoods in Savannah, they were going to give popsicles to the children out in the field, just to establish that relationship between the citizens and the police officers. So I went out there that day and had fun with the kids and the officers out there. So it's about building a relationship with the officers, and also in some cases assisting building relationships with the citizens and the officers as well.
What's the most difficult thing you've had to do in this job?
Without a doubt, the most difficult thing I've ever had to do as a chaplain is to do a death notification when someone's child, their son or their daughter, has died. I mean, it may have been a shooting or terrible accident, car accident, and you have to find their loved ones. I've had to go to homes. I've had to go ask someone to leave their job because we have to speak with them. And so that pain is the worst. That's the worst part of it, to notify a loved one, a person that their loved one won't be coming home anymore.
How often do you have to do that?
Fortunately, it's not very often. We've had to not only go to homes, but sometimes after an accident, the police officers have asked us to come to the hospital with them. Families waiting to find out how their loved one is doing. And when we find out that they've actually died, then a lot of times the officers will wait on a chaplain to come and have that exchange with the loved one to notify them that that person has indeed died. So it's not all the time, thank heavens. It's and you never know when it's going to happen. I mean, I could get a call in 5 minutes. Hopefully not. But just as sure as accidents and everything happen in the city, car accidents or whatever, it could be any minute, any hour of the day or night.
And are you on call, or do you work shift work? How do they structure? How you make yourself available?
So the chaplains, we normally establish a 2-week. We're on call for 2 weeks at a time, and it rotates around the chaplains available. So I will have a 2-week time period where I'm on call. And so if there's a call within that 2-week period, then I'll be the one that responds to whatever that is. And then, of course, we have the situation where we back each other up. So if there's a call that I can't make, then one of the other chaplains will more than likely be able to jump in and take that call for me. But typically, we're on call for 2 weeks at a time.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit now, if I may, and ask about the other part of your faith life. I know that you are involved in a congregation.
Yes.
Do you mind, would you please just tell us about the congregation and the role you play, and we'll just kind of explore that a little bit if we may.
Absolutely. So my wife and I, back in 1997, we started a church called Branded Hearts, and I'm the lead pastor there. Our church is a non-denominational church, so we welcome all there. It's more, I guess, a contemporary type of spirited service where we have the singers and we have the musicians, and sometimes we clap our hands and so forth, and then we share a word of encouragement. There's so many people are troubled, and I mentioned the stress of police officers, but I think there's so much stress in the lives of people in general, and so we try to encourage people that no matter what you're facing, we just encourage them that there is a way to make it through. There's a way for your family to survive. There's a way that we just encourage people that with the help of God, we just believe that everything is going to be okay. So that's what we do, and we try to do that through not only a church service, but we, a couple of weeks ago, it was World Children's Day, so we had a day where the children were out there having fun, and Magic Mark came out, and we had a cookout and everything. So we try to do things for the family, to just involve the family in every type of way that we can.
What part of town are y'all located in?
So we're right on the east side. We're just past Savannah State. We're at Rouche and Simpkin. We're actually building our church over there right now, and hopefully that first building will be done in a couple of weeks. But we're right there, just less than a mile from Savannah State University.
And then how does your congregation think about what I think is usually just called outreach? How does the congregation or the people in the congregation connect maybe to the neighborhood or to other organizations in Savannah that are hopefully doing good things for people?
Absolutely. We strongly believe in outreach. We've supported and still do battered women's shelters. We also provide food to the needy. We've partnered with Savannah State to be there for the students. And Savannah State is very close, so we really appreciate that connection and the partnership with Savannah State. And we also partner with, we actually had service in Hodge Elementary School for a while. So we were there every year, providing school supplies and even uniforms for children. So outreach for our church is very important. And we actually look to even do more in terms of outreach in the city.
And then is there, congregationally, are there a couple of people that who for whatever reason kind of represent that spirit in a really powerful way? A lot of times in a congregation there are one or two people that they are just exemplars in terms of the way they present themselves in the larger community. Might there be a couple of people like that you could talk to us about?
Absolutely. So just very recently, two ladies in our church, they just graduated from a program that is associated with Second Harvest. And so upon their graduation, they're now certified to make our church an actual hub to take in the food, and they know all the steps to be safe and clean and so forth. And so these two ladies, Sylvia Daniels and Deborah Bullock, they exemplify our desire to bless so many families. And so what I've discovered over the last several years, that you can't really look at a person's clothing and determine, and they may look like all is well, but that's not the case many times. And so those two ladies come to mind immediately. We want to do what we can to feed hungry people, for instance. And we found that there's a need for that in the area where we are. And so we try to do that. We've always done that around the holidays, for Thanksgiving, and provide meals, and around Christmas time. But we just want to be a place where people can come anytime. I've always had a desire, once we have a church, a lot of churches are closed Monday through Saturday. I mean, it's just like darkness. But my desire is to have a place that is open 7 days a week with some type of program or something that we can offer the community and the citizens to know that this church is not just here on Sundays, but 7 days a week. We're doing something to encourage someone to be better.
I've never thought of the phrase this way, but to think of oneself as a 7 day a week church is really just, for me, that's just a different mindset. I mean, I grew up in the Jewish faith, and it's kind of Saturdays, Friday nights and Saturdays.
Sure.
But the idea of a 7 day a week church is kind of to me, is a great way to think about that. I've never thought of it quite that way. Let me ask about your own personal journey in the faith. I mean, was there a magic moment when you realized this is where you were going to go?
Well, so my father was a minister in my life. That's the other thing that he did. He did many jobs outside of the home, but he was always in ministry. So that's all I've ever known of him. But the ironic thing is, by seeing my father being in ministry, I always said I didn't want to be in ministry. I didn't want that experience because I had seen him, my father, I thought about him on Father's Day, and then his birthday was 2 days later. But he was the type of man, if he met you right now and you needed the shoes off of his feet, he would give them to you right now. I've seen him do that so many times. We'd have church on Sunday, and my father was a mechanic. And if a single mother had a car, she's trying to leave and a car won't start, I've seen my dad take off his tie and get on the ground and fix this young lady's car so she could go home. And then a lot of times ministry is a thankless job. And so because of that, I said, well, I don't think I want to do that. And so there was a point when I was in Atlanta and I was attending a church, and I just, the way he taught the word, and I said, whoa, I think I'd like to do that. And then this love for people just bloomed in my heart. That's the only way I can describe it. I've always loved people, but this different kind of love bloomed. And I said, wow, I'd like to share this and encourage people myself. And so we started the church. And then the flip side of that was when I married my wife, her father was also a Baptist preacher. And I told her, I said, Denise, the one thing you never have to worry about is I will never be a preacher, you know. And so she married me on that guarantee. Of course, I went back on that word and she eventually forgave me. But it was kind of one of those happenstance kind of situations where I woke up one day and realized I'd had a change of heart, and all that I had seen that I thought may have been negative, it wasn't going to impact this desire I had to help people. And so that's how I came into that.
Well, the story about your father taking off his tie and climbing up under a car, that's the tightest faith in action story I
Yes.
think we've heard so far.
Yes.
I mean, that kind of sums her up right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Did you ever resent that your father was so externally giving?
You know, I never did. I think the only thing that I've always found hurtful personally, and I thought about my parents, they did this for many years. And an older preacher told me one day when I got started, he said, keep in mind that when people come to your church, it's like you're a bus driver and they will ride with you until it's their time to get off and then they're gone. And so it's like you give all you have to give to people. And then many times after you've done that, they walk away and say, well, I'm going to go somewhere else, or I'll go to another church or go to whatever. And so that situation was troubling for me, but I never resented my father. In fact, I've thought about him more after he passed away. And I was just telling my wife the other day, I never saw my father walk around with a negative attitude. I never saw him just grumpy around the house and all these things that I'm tempted with sometime when I'm pressured and everything. I never saw him do that. And so it sort of made me strive to be the type of man now looking back, hindsight being 2020, the type of man that I now see that my father really was. It makes me want to be that kind of man. So to answer your question, I've never resented what he experienced because that was his life, that was his love. He loved my mother, he loved us, and he loved serving people. And how could I resent that? I could not.
I've asked you what the hardest thing you've done as a chaplain has been. What's the hardest thing to do from the pulpit?
Oh, wow. The hardest thing I've had to do from the pulpit was to bury someone's loved one. Or I think about a young lady who I hadn't seen for a couple of weeks. And I know during the summertime, sometimes people traveling on vacation and they don't always check in with us. But you just know people come when they can, and when they don't, they're busy. Well, this young lady who was very active in our church, it turns out that she had been sickly and she didn't go to work for a few days and she had passed away. So to plan with her mother and her family and then to do that service for her. So for me, death is always very painful. It's one of the most painful experiences I think we go through in life. And so to go through those moments with families, even as a chaplain, there was a family who had died in a fire, a mother and daughter. And I was asked to do both of those services. Two unexpected deaths within a couple of weeks of each other. And to have to share with their family and friends. So as a pastor, I think that's the most difficult thing I've ever had to do.
Do you, I'm going to shift gears a little bit again, just because we're talking about pastors in the plural. We hear a lot about sort of interdenominational activity in Savannah. Do you connect with other pastors in other churches and other congregations? Or if I said the word interdenominational, what would sort of spring to your mind?
So what comes to my mind is the fact that I'm also a part of the Savannah Alliance of Pastors, as it's called. But it's not necessarily pastors because it is interdenominational. So We have various denominations. We've come together for various faiths, from the Jewish community to the Islamic community. We've come together at when there were needs in the city, and we've come together. We've just as pastors, just to for the betterment of the city. We've come together, and so there is a very strong multicultural, interdenominational presence in Savannah, and we have made it a point to come together, even just very recently with some of the crimes that took place in Savannah. The mayor and the chief of police called all of us of various faiths together, and so we sat down to have conversations about how we could positively impact what's going on in the city.
That's a great example. And would you have other examples? I mean, I love this phrase, we come together to respond to the needs of the city. Would there be other specific examples of that you could share?
Well, I think about, I go back to one of the hurricanes that took place in Savannah several years ago, and we had families who had been displaced and lost many things. And so that was actually the inception of the Pastors Alliance of Savannah. And so in that time, we would have monthly meetings, and in our monthly meetings, there would always be a Jewish rabbi, and there would be someone from the Islamic faith. So we would meet at least monthly. We would go around, and the idea was to have lunch at these different spots. And so we'd determine where we meet this month, and we sit down and have a meal together. And we found out, I've always been the one to think that we are, at our core, more alike than we are different. And so your beliefs are mine. I don't see that as a reason to keep us separated. So we have made it a point to bypass all of those barriers and to sit down and just say, how can we reason together?
So which denomination cooks the best food?
It is so funny. So Chaplain Sills, we call him, he's a chef. And so a lot of times we'll say, okay, we'll go to your church because we know we're going to have some beans and all these things. So, but it's really funny. But we always tease certain ones that we know that we're going to go over there. And when we go over here, we know we'll probably get a little sub sandwich. And
How does Rabbi Haas stack up on the food side?
Listen, Rabbi Haas, we were supposed to go over for dinner, and something happened, and we didn't make it for a second. But when we were talking to Rabbi Haas, and they were giving him this whole menu of what we wanted, and he said, okay, I'm going to get as close as I can to what you want. But Rabbi Haas, he's just a great man that I've met over the years, and I've always enjoyed his presence and doing so many great things in Savannah. So speaking of Rabbi Haas, he's one that I'm glad I've come to know, a very great man that I respect highly.
It's also very funny.
He is. He's that. He'll come with a quick little something, and he'll have the whole place rolling. You're absolutely right.
That's true in services as well.
I can only imagine.
I'll leave it there. I'd be curious if, again, this is personal, but I'd be curious as you sort of look forward in your own life, what are you hoping you can do personally in this community, and what are you hoping that your congregation can do in this community going forward?
One of the things that I'd like to do in terms of this community is I'd like to leave, I'd like my legacy to be service. There's so many, people who are popular on social media because of a post and because of various things. I'm not sure how much of that is actually the reality of their lives, but in the reality of my situation, I would like to spend, for Father's Day and Men's Day at our church very recently, I told them I read a story where a man said there are probably more years behind me at this point than there are in front of me. And so I told them it's about adding value to someone else's life while we can, and making a mark in our communities and in families. And as those who are wiser than us pour into us, we have to spend that time pouring into someone else. And so I would like to, that's what I like to do. I'd like to make the most of the years that are in front of me by serving and assisting young men, young boys, young girls. I have a son and a daughter, and I see the importance of imparting what I can, whatever wisdom I can into their lives. And so to do that, my mother is still here, and so I have very much respect for my elders as well, and to serve them and honor them. And as far as a pastor, I want the people to know that the work that needs to be done is truly outside of the four walls. And so that's what I want to do what we can to make our communities better, to make Savannah better, whatever small impact we can make. That's how I'd like to spend my time.
This seems like a good place to stop. You've been a very wonderful person to interview.
Thank you.
Good way to start the day for us.
Thank you.
Are
It's
there-
been my pleasure.
Are there things that you'd like to make sure that you say that the questions have not allowed you to say? Is there something you kind of came into the room driving over here thinking, I want to make sure to talk about this or talk about that, and I just didn't give you a space to do it?
Well, a lot of people, I just like to say this as a chaplain, a lot of people, when they see a chaplain, they automatically think the worst has happened. Even the other day, I was with the police officers and they were giving out popsicles just to make, and so one grandmother was coming up to pick up her grandchild, and she came in, she said, "Oh my God, what's happened?" And I said, "Nothing's happened. We're giving the children popsicles and just let them know we care." And so I'd like for people to know, when, as chaplains, we care. And we're there just to be a support and to be present, that ministry of presence. And we want people to know that we're there not just in tragedy, but just to let them know that we're a positive, if there's a positive influence in a moment, that's what we're there for. And so that's the one thing I'd like to say. And thank you.
I'm glad we got that. That's great. Thank you. Are we okay back here?
I think we're great, yeah.
Yes, yeah, wonderful.
Good. All right. Well, thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been our pleasure, really. No, delightful. And I'll probably see you at Home Depot in the next 3 weeks. That's how Savannah works.
Absolutely.
As best I can tell, you meet somebody and then they're in Home Depot in a week.
Right.